Hello and welcome to Square Raindrop. I'm Jo Wheeler.
And I'm Steph Goldson.
Let's talk hurricanes, starting with Kirk.
Let's do that. Now, before, when we had our little chat, we were talking about Kirk maybe coming to the UK, maybe not. Well, now, not. Yeah, there's lots of different models. There's the American model, the Japanese model, the UK model, the European model, and they all look at the same data, essentially, and they come up with totally different answers. So, at the moment, the convention seems to be that it's stopping for a baguette in France.
There you go. It's a hurricane, Jim, but not as we know it. And that was a Star Trek reference. And if you don't know it, I'm just going to explain it now. So when this thing actually arrives, okay, we're looking at a lot of rain and some strong winds. I mean, we will be affected by it to a small degree.
Might
No,
be
not
a
really.
bit blustery. There might be a little clip around Kent, but I really think most of it's going to be to the south. What we're going to notice this week, Jo, is it's going to get cold.
And that's still down to Kirk, moving sideways, moving off to Denmark and Germany, starts pulling in this cold air. Now, you see, when you say it's turning cold, how cold?
Really very nippy. We're looking at temperatures way below freezing over much of Scotland and Northern England during the night, obviously, not during the day. I think highest temperatures in London by Friday is looking about 11 or 12. So really quite chilly, especially compared to what we've been used to. And we were saying that was cold. So we are expecting a little bit of snow, mostly over the mountains in Scotland. But yes, chillier than now.
Chillier than now. That sounds vaguely biblical. And whilst we're talking about biblical weather, the States are having a really tough time of it at the moment. We had Hurricane Helene, which caused massive flooding in parts of the Carolinas. And close on its heels, we've got Milton, which has just turned Category 5 with winds of 155 miles per hour, a storm surge 15 to 20 feet, and quite extraordinarily, that was a long word for now, wasn't it? It dropped 32 millibars in 4 hours, which is likely to be the fastest ever intensification ever seen in the Gulf of Mexico.
It is a powerful beast. And the real concern about this is it's going to slam into the west of Florida, pushing ahead of it a load of water, a massive storm surge to an area that already saw a storm surge with Helene, which was only less than 2 weeks ago. So they haven't cleared up properly yet. There's debris everywhere, right on the coast. And that's just going to be turned into missiles by the next storm surge that comes in. Now, the only hope really, what I'm really crossing my fingers about, is exactly where the eye of the storm goes. Because of the way that the winds go round a hurricane, the worst of the storm surge will be to the south of the storm. So if the storm goes to the south of Tampa, so it just is to the south, the worst of the winds will be to the south of that, and the worst of the storm surge won't go up Tampa Bay. But if that storm heads a little bit further north than Tampa, then all of that water is going to be funneled up Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay, Clearwater and St. Petersburg, this great big conurbation, has 3.2 million people living there. So, you know, we really could do without this storm making massive problems there.
I was noting how these names just run off your tongue. Didn't your brother used to live there?
Yeah, so I'm quite familiar with St. Petersburg. My brother used to live there until quite recently, so I've visited quite a lot. Beautiful place, I mean, lovely, but very, very flat. So when you're talking about a 3.5 meter storm surge, that's all of it. There's nothing else over 3.5 meters. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but it's really flat. So that's going to cause way more problems than if it was a really rocky, shoreline. It's just not. It's totally flat.
And did he ever have any hurricane problems there?
He had to evacuate a couple of times. Once, I can't remember the name of the one that got him this time, but he was told he had to evacuate from St. Petersburg. So they went to Orlando. And then, of course, the hurricane decided it didn't want to go where it was supposed to, and it didn't go to St. Petersburg. Instead, it went to Orlando.
Oh, so we got caught in it anyway.
Yes, he evacuated into the path of the hurricane. Brilliant.
Excellent. Sounds like one of your stories, Steph. Well, it was one of your stories, actually, because it was your brother. But anyhow, a lot of people are leaving the area already. They've been recommended to evacuate. There's also a state of emergency for Walt Disney World and Orlando Resort. This, of course, would be my excuse not to take my children there, but they're too grown up now. I can't use that excuse anymore.
Yeah, so my brother's child, one of them, is still in Florida and he's not evacuating. A lot of people are, oh, it's a hurricane. We'll prepare, but we've still got jobs to go to. The entire state, I guess, can't get it. I mean, I'd be in Michigan by now. I'll be off, but then I'm a coward.
Now, of course, we have got, well, first of all, like I said, the record drop in pressure in this storm in a very short space of time. I think it's also a record that we've currently got three, if not four, hurricanes or embryonic hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, what happens at this stage, everybody starts talking conspiracy theories, or are they? Somebody said that it's never happened that a hurricane has blown up where Milton started and then moved its way east. Now, looking back at the records through the National Hurricane Center, there was Tropical Storm Mindy in 2021, Tropical Storm Emily in 2017, and Tropical Storm Debbie in 2012. Okay, I can see the obvious, they're tropical storms, not hurricanes, but they did form in that part of the world and then started to move their way east.
Yeah, so we usually think of storms coming from the west and heading east, and most of them form from a cluster of thunderstorms that kind of pops off the coast of Africa. And as they track across the very warm waters of the Atlantic, they form into hurricanes. But there's not really a reason why they can't form elsewhere. It's just all you need is an initial disturbance, like a good chunk of thunderstorms, not just one, but a nice little cluster of them. You need conditions right in the upper, so you can't have, if the winds are really high up in the atmosphere, it'll push the whole thing over and it can't really get going. So you've got to have what they call like low wind shear, like the winds have got to be quite common. You've got to have really warm waters, and the waters in the Gulf of Mexico at this time of year are really warm. In fact, they're above average at the moment. And so it's not out of the question that we couldn't get them from the Gulf of Mexico. It's just the way that the climate works is that thunderstorms from Africa pop off into the sea. It just makes more sense. There's more of those type of clusters so that we see more hurricanes going that way. But there's no reason why they can't form elsewhere. We just don't have as many clusters of thunderstorms, I guess. They're heading east. Often we see them curve around towards the west. That's generally a more common way, but that would just be what's going on in the upper atmosphere. If there's a great big high pressure blocking its path, it will just go round it. And that's what happens always. That's why Kirk is heading towards us, because there's a block ahead of it. So it's just curved back and heading off with the jet stream over to France.
So, a couple of questions. When Kirk arrives over northwestern parts of Europe, why won't it be as strong as it has been?
So it's lost its energy source. The energy source is the sea. That's for the hurricanes. And the strongest point is at the bottom where the sea is. When they move northwards, they lose their energy source. It's like someone's turned their engine off and they kind of grind to a halt a little bit. But they can get swept up in a normal kind of, our everyday regular frontal type storms. And in that case, they become post-tropical or extratropical. And in that case, it doesn't mean that they won't be as strong. It doesn't mean that they won't be as big. Often, they turn larger when they combine with a normal storm, because there's nothing, when they're circulating around a hurricane, circulating around a center, it keeps the really strong winds right in the center. But when they get swept up in like a normal storm, they just expand. That's why Sandy was such a massive storm when it hits the States, because it was a hurricane, but it got swept up into a much bigger system. And the whole thing then just was, very big and incredibly powerful.
So, just going back to the hurricane season in America, very early on in the season, the Atlantic was reaching record temperatures. So, we saw that Hurricane Beryl, I think it was Beryl, formed very quickly and was quite a violent storm early on. And then you referenced the last time we spoke the fact that the hurricanes died down because of Saharan dust. Why would that have quieted them down?
Because most of the hurricanes that we see during a hurricane season are formed from a cluster of thunderstorm that pops off the coast of Africa, like I said before. So if that happens, but you get a load of dust over the top, it stops the power of the sun from turning them into these great big thunderstorms. And then the power, it doesn't get going in order to build a hurricane.
Okay. And the last bit, which is where angels fear to tread, because again, there's much chatter on X at the moment, certainly, about the fact that these hurricanes have been manipulated. Is there the technology to do that?
I think that, say, the US would be mad if they weren't trying to, because they cause such devastation. Of course, you'd want to move them out of the way or somehow deflect them from your waters. But I don't believe the technology is there, because I don't believe that there is anything that powerful that can move them out of the way. What they tried to do in Japan was really clever. So they had some researchers in Japan and they pumped cold water into the path of typhoons, which are hurricanes over there. And the idea was you turned off its energy and therefore it would just die. I guess it didn't work because I didn't hear much more about that research.
That was the end of that.
Yeah, but it would be mad if they weren't, because why would you not try and protect yourself? And the amount you could save in damages and multi-billion-dollar kind of problems from these storms would be immense. It would make it just, you'd be mad not to, put it like that. But I don't believe, because they're from the ground right up to the tropopause and they are such big, powerful things, I don't believe the technology is there.
When we spoke about this before and we addressed it in a former podcast, we know that geoengineering exists.
Absolutely.
We know that some countries do it and have been doing it since Second World War. They've tried to use it in Vietnam as well. When you look for the patents, there are many. I mean, they run into hundreds. And isn't the issue that if you did have the ability to manipulate weather, that you could use it for harm as well as good?
I guess you could use it for harm. Yes, I guess you could. I guess there's nothing stopping you. But I think most countries would use it to protect themselves. The way it's used at the moment mostly is over mountains, generally, where they just try and seed the rain. So they put particles up into the atmosphere, and then the rain that comes, put a few particles up, you get more rain. And then that falls. They also use it to dissipate some storms so we don't get as much hail. Not in this country because we just get drizzly rain, but in the States they use it quite a lot. And they also use it in Spain and in the Middle East. If you get hailstorms and you also are growing crops, that's a recipe for disaster, because that's one of the worst, most destructive types of weather for crops. Hail just shreds everything. So yes, they use it to try and save money, essentially, and make more crops. And it ends up being cost effective. If they could manipulate the hurricanes and move them, that would be cost effective. What is being proposed that they are doing, which with Milton is making it suddenly very, very powerful and heading it towards Florida, to me makes no sense.
Yeah, you would think after Helene that somebody would actually steer any other hurricane well away, because the cleanup operation, as you say, has barely started in Florida. Well, obviously we're going to be watching the weather for the next 24, 48 hours, see what happens in America. It's likely to be fairly dramatic, whatever happens. And we will be back with the somewhat quieter UK weather in the near future. In the meantime, if you want to contact us, want a personal forecast, you know where to find us.
Weather@squareraindrop.com. Send us an email.